Aliens laughed when he faced the beast alone until he made it his pet. The stench of burnt metal and charred flesh hung heavy in the recycled air of the Galactic Council chamber commander. Cable Barnes stood at rigid attention, his battle-worn uniform still bearing the scars of the last skirmish around him. The varied members of the council regarded him with expressions ranging from grudging respect to outright disgust. Commander Barnes, the Sellian chancellor, began, his ray voice dripping with disdain. While we acknowledge your contributions to our recent victory, the Council has determined that your unorthodox tactics and blatant disregard for protocol cannot go unchallenged. Cable bit back a snarky retort. You mean the tactics that saved your scaly hides? As such, the Chancellor continued, we have decided to bestow upon you a special assignment. Consider it a reward for your service, the sarcasm lacing the aliens' tone set Cable's teeth on edge. He knew a setup when he heard one. There is a remote planet on the fringes of the Maelstrom Nebula, Vexus Prime. We need you to survey the surface and report back on any potential resources or strategic value. Cable frowned. He'd heard of Vexus Prime. The place was a nightmare, ravaged by ion storms, crawling with apex predators, and home to a few thousand scrappy settlers eking out a hard Scrabble existence. It was the kind of mission you sent someone on if you wanted them to disappear. I'm a soldier, not a damn prospector. Cable growled. You are what we tell you to be, snapped the Archon of the Cayenne Collective, his crystalline eyes flashing. This is not a request, Commander. It is an order from the Council. You will depart within the hour. Cable's jaw clenched, but he knew when he was outranked and outgunned. Understood, he bit out as he strove from the council chamber. Cable's mind raced. This was a death sentence, plain and simple. The pompous worms on the council might cloak it in fancy words, but he knew they expected him to die on Vex's Prime, lost and forgotten like hell he would. Cable squared his shoulders, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. If the council wanted to play games, he'd show them exactly what a human was capable of. He'd complete their little errand and come back to make them choke on their smug superiority. It was time to show these alien bastards what indomitable really meant. The hangar bay was a hive of activity as Cable prepped his ship for departure. He moved with practice efficiency, running system checks and loading supplies. The sleek vessel, a heavily modified Raven-class scout ship, hummed to life under his touch. Commander Barnes. Cable turned to see a young Enin hurrying towards him, her blue skin flushed with exertion. What is it, Enin? Sora, sir, I have your mission briefing. She held out a data pad, her slender fingers trembling slightly. Is it true what they're saying, that the Council is sending you to Vexus Prime? Cable took the pad with a curt nod. Looks that way, but Sir Sora's voice dropped to a whisper. No one comes back from Vexus Prime. The creatures there, I've heard stories. I'm not too worried about campfire tales. And then Cable fixed her with a level stare. I've faced worse than whatever boogeyman the Council wants to throw at me. Sora swallowed hard, her gaze flickering to the jagged scar that ran along Cable's jawline, a souvenir from a particularly nasty Runin with a tie-in berserker of course, sir, I didn't mean to imply. Relax, kid. Cable softened his tone. I'll be back before you know it. Someone's got to keep you greenhorns in line. A ghost of a smile touched Sora's lips. Yes, sir, good hunting. As the Enin departed, Cable turned his attention to the data pad. The mission briefing was sparse, just a set of coordinates and a vague directive to survey the area. No maps, no intel on the local fauna or potential hazards. The Council was setting him up to fail. Cable's lips thinned into a hard line. Failure wasn't an option. He'd fade long odds before for and come out on top. This time would be no different. He boarded his ship, the hatch sealing behind him with a hiss of hydraulics. The cockpit was a comforting cocoon of gleaming control panels and worn leather. Cable slid into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls with practiced ease. The engines roared to life. The deck Plates thrumming beneath his feet, Cable felt a familiar thrill rushed through his veins. This was where he belonged. Hurtling through the stars, chasing the unknown as the ship lifted off, Cable caught a final glimpse of the council chamber through the view screen. The alien dignitaries looked so small, so petty. From this vantage point, they thought they could break him, bury him on some forgotten rock at the edge of the galaxy. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Cable gunned the thrusters, the force of acceleration slamming him back against his seat. The stars blurred into streaks of light as the ship leapt into hyperdrive. Next stop, Vexus Prime, where the real fun would begin. The journey to Vexus Prime was uneventful, the monotony of hyperspace broken only by the occasional blip on the ship sensors. Cable used the time to familiarize himself with what little data he had on the planet: atmospheric composition, gravity, temperature ranges. It wasn't much, but he'd worked with less. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace on the fringes of the Maelstrom Nebula, Cell got his first glimpse of Vexus Prime. The planet hung against the starry backdrop like a bruised and battered fruited surface, a mottled patchwork of sickly greens and muddy browns. Angry red storms swirled across its atmosphere, crack with eldritch energy. Well, aren't you a pretty little hellhole, Cable muttered, his fingers dancing over the ship's controls. As he initiated the landing sequence, the descent was rough, the ship bucking and shuddering as it plunged through the roiling cloud cover. Lightning forked past the view screen close enough to rattle Cable's teeth. He gritted his jaw and held the ship steady, his knuckles white on the control yawl. After what felt like an eternity, the ship broke through the lower atmosphere and emerged into a nightmare landscape. Jagged spires of obsidian clawed at the sickly green sky, their peaks lost in the swirling mists. Fetid swamps bubbled and hissed, belching noxious gases into the air. In the distance, a range of twisted mountains loomed, their slopes shrouded in an eerie pooling bioluminescence. Cable brought the ship down on a relatively stable patch of ground, the landing gear sinking into the spongy fungal mat that passed for soil. Here he powered down the engines and sat back in his seat, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. He knew the council expected him to fail, to stumble blindly into whatever horrors lurked out there and never be seen again. But Cable Barnes was not a man to go gently into that good night. He'd faced death 1,000 times, laughed in its face and spat in its eye. This planet, with all its terrors and mysteries, was just another challenge to be conquered, and conquer it he would. Cable rose from his seat, his boots ringing on the deck plates as he strode to the ship's armory. He suited up with practiced efficiency, strapping on his trusty plasma rifle and a bandolier of grenades. A wicked-looking combat knife found its home in his boot, while a compact medkit and survival gear went into the pouches on his belt. As he stepped towards the airlock, Cable caught his reflection in the polished metal of the bulkhead. The face that stared back at him was lean and hard, etched with the lines of a man who had seen too much and lost even more. But there was a fire in those eyes, a stubborn, unquenchable flame that refused to be extinguished. The council had sent him here to die, but Cable Barnes was not a man to die quietly. He would fight, he would endure, and he would emerge victorious, for he was human, and the invincible spirit of humanity burned within him, an unquenchable beacon in the darkness. With a final check of his gear, Cable hit the airlock controls and stepped out onto the surface of Vexus Prime. The hunt was on. The first thing that hit Cable as he stepped out of the airlock was the smell, a cloying fetid stem that seemed to coat the inside of his nostrils and cling to the back of his throat. He fought the urge to gag, his eyes watering as they adjusted to the sickly green light filtering through the haze. He took a cautious step forward, his boots squelching in the spongy ground. The air was thick and humid, laden with spores and microscopic insects that drifted lazily on the breeze. In the distance, a keening wail echoed across the swamps. A Sound that set Cable's teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Okay, Barnes," he muttered to himself. "Time to get your bearings." He pulled out a scanner, the device warring to life in his hand. The readout was a mess of static and garbled data, the planet's strange energies playing havoc with the delicate electronics. Cable frowned, tapping the screen in a vain attempt to clear the interference. A sudden movement in the corner of his eye made him whirl around, his plasma rifle snapping up to his shoulder. He scanned the tree line, his finger hovering over the trigger for a long moment. Nothing stirred. Then, with a rustling of leaves and a snap of twigs, a creature emerged from the undergrowth. It was a beast out of nightmare, a hulking mass of mottled blue fur and rippling muscle. Its head was broad and flat, with a wide tooth-filed maw and a pair of curving obsidian horns that gleamed in the sickly light, its eyes a piercing amber, fixed on Cable. With an unsettling intelligence, Cable's finger tightened on the trigger, but he hesitated. The creature, for all its fearsome appearance, made no move to attack. It simply watched him, its gaze unwavering. "Easy there, big fella," Cable said softly, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. "I'm not here to cause trouble." The beast snorted, a puff of hot breath misting in the air. Then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and melted back into the foliage, disappearing as silently as it had come. Cable let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He'd seen his share of alien wildlife, but there was something about that creature, a sense of raw primal power that set it apart from anything he'd encountered before. He shook off the unsettling feeling and turned his attention back to the scanner. The interference was still present, but he managed to isolate a faint energy signature coming from the northwest. About 2 clicks from his position, it was as good a place to start as any. Shouldering his rifle, Cable set off into the swamps, his boots sinking into the muck with each step. The going was slow, the dare rain treacherous and unpredictable. More than once he found himself up to his knees in a hidden bog, the fetid water seeping into his suit and making his skin crawl as he pushed deeper into the wilderness. Cable couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The sensation prickled at the back of his neck, an itch he couldn't scratch. He scanned the shadows between the trees, the dancing moires of light in the mist, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling persisted, a constant companion as he forged ahead into the unknown heart of Vexus Prime. Little did he know the true challenges were yet to come. The energy signature led Cable to the base of the twisted mountain range. He spotted from the air up close the peaks were even more unsettling, their surfaces pulsing with an eerie bioluminescent glow. Strange cues gross clung to the rock face, pulsating softly in the gloom. As he approached the mountains, Cable's scanner began to ping more insistently, the signal growing stronger with each step. He followed the readout, picking his way carefully through the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet gave way and Cable found himself tumbling down a steep embankment. He hit the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs. For a moment he lay there stunned, blinking up at the sickly green sky. Then a shadow fell across him, and Cable found himself staring into a pair of luminous silver eyes. The creature looming over him was humanoid, but only in the loosest sense of the word. Its skin was a mottled gray, shot through with pulsing veins of bioluminescence. A pair of curving kittis horns sprouted from its elongated skull. In its mouth was a gaping maw filled with needle-sharp teeth. Cable reacted on instinct, his hand flying to the plasma rifle at his side, but before he could bring the weapon to bear, the creature spoke. "Peace, outsider," it said, its voice a rasping whisper. "I mean you no harm." Cable hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. You can talk." The creature inclined its head. "I am Kisan, shaman of the Beaks. We have watched your progress since you arrived on our world." Cable slowly lowered his rifle, his mind racing. Intelligent life on Vexus Prime. The Council's briefing hadn't mentioned anything about that. "Why haven't you Contacted the Galactic Council, he asked, climbing wearily to his feet. Made your presence known, Shan made a low, chittering sound that might have been laughter. The Council has no interest in U.S. outsider. We are beneath their notice. A primitive curiosity at best. They send their cast-offs and undesirables here too. The planet they believe to be a savage, uninhabitable wasteland. Cable frowned. Cast-offs and undesirables, what are you talking about? The shaman gestured for Cable to follow, leading him deeper into the mountains. As they walked, Sean spoke of the true nature of Vexus Prime, not a desolate hellscape, but a refuge for those that Council deemed unworthy or inconvenient. Over the centuries they have sent many here, Sanan said. The exiled, the disgraced, the ones who dared to question or defy the Council's authority. We have taken them in, given them a home among the Vexen. Cable's mind reeled at the implications. The Council had been using Vexus Prime as a dumping ground for their problems, a convenient way to dispose of anyone who didn't fit their tidy narrative. And now they've sent you, Gon said, fixing Cable with those luminous eyes. The human who fought too fiercely, who refused to bow to their whims. They seek to break you, to make an example of you. Cable's jaw clenched, a cold fury building in his chest. The Council had underestimated him, just as they had underestimated the Vex and all the other outcasts they banished to this world. They would come to regret that mistake. As Cable followed Kazan deeper into the mountains, his mind raced with the implications of what he learned. The Council's betrayal stung, but it also fueled his determination. He would not be another forgotten castoff left to rot on this forsaken planet. The shaman led him to a hidden valley nestled between the glowing peaks. As they emerged from the narrow pass, Cable's eyes widened at the sight before him. A sprawling settlement filled the valley, a bustling hive of activity. Structures of organic design melted seamlessly with the pulsing bioluminescent landscape, as if they had grown from the very earth itself. Beings of all shapes and sizes moved among the buildings, a kaleidoscope of colors and forms. Welcome to Nar, Kekin said, his voice tinged with pride. The heart of the Vex and a sanctuary for all those the Council has discarded. As they walked through the settlement, Cable couldn't help but marvel at the diversity of the inhabitants. He saw species he recognized from his travels, as well as others he'd never encountered before. All of them, he realized, united by their shared status as outcasts and exiles. Sean led him to a large central structure where a group of Vex elders awaited. They greeted Cable with a mix of curiosity and weariness, their luminous eyes assessing him carefully. The human warrior, one of them, said, her voice a soft trilling whisper. We have heard of your exploits, your defiance of the Council's authority. Cable met her gaze unflinchingly. I did what I believed was right, just as I suspect all of you have done. The elders exchanged glances, a ripple of approval passing through the group. Indeed, the female said, the Council may brand us as undesirable, but we know the truth. We are the ones who dared to question, to challenge the status quo, and for that we were banished. Cable nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Their loss. As the elders began to share their stories, Cable listened with growing amazement. These beings had faced incredible hardships, endured unimaginable trials, yet they had not only survived but thrived. They had built a community here, a home for the lost and the forgotten. In that moment, Cable knew he had found more than just a refuge. He had found a purpose. The Council thinks they've sent me to my death, he said, his voice ringing with conviction, but they've underestimated me. Just as they've underestimated all of you. They think they can break us, but they're wrong. We're stronger than they know, and we're going to show them just how strong we are. The elders murmured their approval, their eyes glinting with a fierce, determined light. Jean placed a hand on Cable's shoulder, his touch surprisingly warm. You are one of us now, Cable Barnes, the shaman said. Together we will face whatever challenges this world and the council may throw at us. As the gathering dispersed, Cable felt a renewed sense of purpose flowing through him. He may have come to vex his prime as an exile, but he would leave as something far greater, a leader, a champion, a symbol of the enduring human spirit and heaven. Help anyone who stood in his way. Over the next few weeks, Cable immersed himself in the life of the Or settlement. He learned the ways of the Vex and their customs and traditions, and in turn shared his own knowledge and skills. His expertise in tactics and combat quickly earned him a place among the settlement's defenders, and he spent long hours training with the Vex and warriors, hunting their abilities and forging them into a formidable fighting force. But even as he threw himself into his new role, Cable couldn't shake the memory of his first encounter on Vexus Prime, the hulking horned beast that had watched him with such unsettling intelligence. He found himself drawn to the wilderness beyond the settlement, driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. One day, as he crept through the undergrowth, his senses on high alert, Cable found himself face to face with the creature. Once again, the tracks he'd been following had led him deep into the tangled heart of the forest, far from the safety of the Nar settlement. You again, he muttered, lowering his plasma rifle slightly. What do you want? The beast snorted, its massive head tilting to one side as if considering him. Cable took a cautious step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Easy there, big fella, he said softly. I'm not here to hurt you. The creature huffed a sound that almost seemed like laughter. It took a step closer, its movements slow and deliberate. Cable holstered his rifle and held out a hand, palm up. That's it, he murmured. Nice and easy. The beast stretched out its neck, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed Cable's hand. Then, to his amazement, it butted its head gently against his palm, a low rumble emanating from its chest. Well, I'll be damned, Cable breathed. You're just a big softy, aren't you? The creature snorted again, as if in agreement. Cable chuckled, a grin spreading across his face. All right, then, he said, I guess we're friends now, but you need a name. How about Azra, after the warrior from the old Earth stories? The beast's ears perked up, and it made a sound that Cable could have sworn was approval. He laughed, patting its neck affectionately. From that day forward, Azra became Cable's constant companion. Together they roamed the wilds of Vexus Prime, facing the planet's danger side by side with Azra by his side. Cable felt invincible, as if he could take on the entire galaxy and emerge victorious. As they made their way back to the settlement, Cable couldn't help but marvel at the strange turn his life had taken. Here he was on a planet at the edge of the known universe, bonding with a creature straight out of a fever dream, but somehow it felt right. Like this was exactly where he was meant to be. They were greeted at the settlement gates by a crowd of curious onlookers, the Vex and the other exiles, whispering and pointing at the sight of the human warrior and his fearsome new companion. Gon pushed his way to the front, his luminous eyes wide with amazement. Cable Barnes, he said, his voice hushed with awe. You have tamed a cracks. No one has ever accomplished such a feat. Cable grinned, scratching Azrak behind the ears. What can I say? I'm just that good. The shaman shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You are full of surprises, human. The council has no idea what they have unleashed upon the galaxy. Cable's grin turned fierce, a glint of steel in his eyes. They're about to find out. With Azra by my side and the strength of the Vex and behind me, we're going to show them what happens when you mess with the outcast and the forgotten. He raised his voice, addressing the gathered crowd. The council thinks they can break us, but they're wrong. We're stronger than they know, and we're going to prove it to them once and for all. A cheer went up from the assembled exiles, a roar of defiance and determination that echoed off the glowing mountains. Cable felt a surge of pride and purpose flowing through him, a sense of belonging he'd never known before. As word of his bond with the mighty creature spread, whispers began to circulate among the Vexen and the other exiles. They spoke of the human warrior and his fearsome companion of their strength and their courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Cable became more than just a leader, he became a legend, but even as his reputation grew, Cable knew that his greatest challenge still lay ahead. The council would not take his defiance lying down. Sooner or later they would come for him and for all those who dared to stand with him, and when that day came, Cable would be ready with Azra by his side and the strength of the Vexen behind him. He would show the council the true meaning of the resilience of the human spirit, for he was Cable Barnes, the exiled warrior, the champion of the forgotten, and he would not rest until Vex's prime and all those who called it home were free from the council's tyranny once and for all. In the weeks that followed, Cable threw himself into preparing the Nar settlement for the inevitable confrontation with the council. He worked tirelessly alongside the Vexen, warriors fortifying defenses, stockpiling weapons, and drilling the settlers in the art of war. But even as he focused on the practical matters of survival, Cable couldn't shake the sense that something was missing. He'd found a purpose here on Vexus Prime, a cause to fight for, but there was still a void in his heart, a longing for something he couldn't quite name. It was Azra who finally helped him put a finger on it. The big beast had become more than just a companion. He was a confidant, a sounding board for Cable's deepest thoughts and fears. "I don't know, buddy," Cable sighed one evening as they sat watching the sunset over the glowing mountains. "I feel like I'm doing what I meant to do, but there's still something off." Azra rumbled softly, butting his head against Cable's shoulder in a gesture of comfort. Cable chuckled, scratching the beast behind the ears. I know, I should be grateful for what I have, and but I can't help feeling like there's something more out there, as if in answer a flicker of movement caught Cable's eye. He turned to see a group of Vexen women watching him from the edge of the settlement. Their luminous eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and admiration. One of them, a lithe blue skin beauty named Rocco, stepped forward, a coy smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Cable Barnes," she purred, her voice like liquid silk, "the human warrior who tamed a KRX. You're quite the legend around here." Cable grinned, rising to his feet. "I don't know about legend," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief, "but I do have a few tricks up my sleeve." Rule laughed, a musical sound that sent a shiver down Cable's spine. "I'll bet you do," she murmured, stepping closer. "Perhaps you'd like to show me sometime." Over the next few weeks, Cable found himself spending more and more time with Rock Cool and her friends. They were a welcome distraction from the constant preparations for war, a chance to let loose and enjoy the simple pleasures of life, and enjoy them he did. The Vex and women were as passionate as they were beautiful, and Cable soon found himself falling into a whirlwind of steamy encounters and wild nights. They taught him the ways of their people, showed him hidden corners of the settlement where they could steal a few moments of privacy, and introduced him to pleasures he'd never even dreamed of. But even as he lost himself in the thrill of the moment, Cable knew that this was more than just physical attraction. There was a connection here, a sense of kinship and understanding that went beyond mere lust. These women had faced the same hardships he had been cast aside and forgotten by the same uncaring council. They understood his pain, his anger, his unquenchable thirst for justice, and in their arms Cable found a moment of peace. A fleeting glimpse of the life he'd always yearned for, a life of love, of family, of belonging. He knew it couldn't last forever. The council's forces were drawing ever closer, and the final battle loomed on the horizon. But for now, in the stolen moment of happiness, Cable allowed himself to dream of a future beyond the next fight, a future where he could build a home, raise a family, and live out his days surrounded by the people he loved, and with that dream burning bright in his heart. Cable Barnes prepared to face his destiny, ready to show the council once and for all what it meant to be human. As the days turned into weeks, Cable found himself growing ever closer to Rawl and her companions. They became his confidence, his support system, his reason to keep fighting even when the odds seemed insurmountable. But even as he reveled in their affection and camaraderie, Cable knew that the clock was ticking. The Council's forces were drawing nearer with each passing day, and it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He threw himself into the preparations with renewed vigor, working alongside the Vexen warriors to shore up the settlement's defenses and train the civilians in the art of combat. Azra was a constant presence at his side, a fierce and loyal guardian who struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. But even as they braced for the coming storm, Cable couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a losing battle. The Council's resources were vast, their armies seemingly endless. How could a ragtag band of outcasts and exiles hope to stand against such overwhelming force? It was Ruckle who finally voiced the thought that had been lurking in the back of Cable's mind. We can't win this fight, Cable, she said softly one night as they lay entwined in his bed. Not here. Not like this. The Council will just keep sending more and more troops until they grind us into dust. Cable sighed, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. I know, he admitted, but what choice do we have? We can't just sit back and let them slaughter us. Rockcool propped herself up on one elbow, her luminous eyes boring into his. What if we took the fight to them? She asked. What if we struck at the heart of their power instead of waiting for them to come to us? Cable frowned, considering the idea. It was a risky gambit, but it had a certain audacious appeal. If they could catch the Council off guard, hit them where they were weakest. It's a long shot, he said slowly. We'd be going up against their entire military apparatus on their home turf. The odds of success would be slim at best. Rackle grinned fiercely, her teeth flashing in the dim light. Since when have you been one to play it safe? Cable Barnes, I thought you live for this kind of thing. Cable couldn't help but laugh. She had a point. He'd never been one to back down from a challenge, no matter how daunting, and if there was even a chance that they could end this war once and for all, didn't they owe it to themselves to try? All right, he said, his voice hardening with resolve. Let's do it. Let's take the fight to the Council's doorstep and show them what happens when you mess with humanity. The next few days passed in a blur of frenzied activity as Cable and his allies prepared for their audacious gambit. They gathered what resources they could, planned and schemed and strategized, and said their goodbyes to the settlement that had become their home. And then, with Azrak by his side and a fire in his heart, Cable Barnes set out to face his destiny. The Count thought they had beaten him, thought they had sealed humanity's fate. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The journey back to the heart of the Council's territory was a tense and perilous one. Cable and his small band of rebels had to navigate through hostile space, relying on stealth and cunning to avoid detection by the Council's patrols. But they weren't alone in their fight. As they made their way closer to their goal, they were joined by an unexpected ally, Enan Sora, the young officer who had assisted Cable in his preparations for the fateful mission to Vex's Prime. I knew you'd make it back, she said with a fierce grin as she boarded their ship. When the Council sent you to that death trap of a planet, I thought they'd finally lost their minds, but I should have known better than to underestimate you. Cable chuckled, clasping her hand in a firm grip. I guess I gave them quite a surprise, didn't I? Sora's eyes widened as Azra lumbered into view, the massive CNCK sniffing the air curiously. Is that my new partner? Cable said, patting the beast flank affectionately. Azra and I have been through a lot together. He's as much a part of this rebellion as any of us. As word of Cable's return spread, other allies began to emerge from the shadows. Disgruntled soldiers who had chafed under the Council's corrupt rule, civilian sympathizers who had long dreamed of freedom, even a few high-ranking officials who had grown disillusioned with the regime they served. Cable welcomed them all, his natural charisma and unwavering conviction drawing them to his cause. Like moths to a flame, with each new recruit, their strength grew, their resolve hardened. They were no longer just a band of exiles and outcasts, but a true resistance movement united in their determination to bring down the council. Once and for all, among the rebels was a grizzled veteran named Lambert who had served under Cable in the councils military before being discharged for insubordination. "I always knew you had it in you, Barnes," he said with a wry grin as they pored over star maps and battle plans. "The council never could handle someone who didn't fit their mold." Cable snorted. "They thought they could break me by sending me to Vex's Prime. They thought they could crush the human spirit with their cruelty and oppression." He looked around at the ragtag group of rebels assembled before him, his eyes blazing with a fierce determination. But they were wrong. They underestimated the strength that lies within each and every one of us, the strength to endure, to adapt, to overcome. His gaze settled on Azra, who was curled up in a corner of the ship's hold watching the proceedings with a lazy eye on Vexus Prime. "I learned that strength firsthand. I learned that there's no obstacle too great, no challenge too daunting when you have something worth fighting for." A murmur of agreement rippled through the rebels, a sense of shared purpose and unbreakable resolve. They knew that the odds were stacked against them, that the council's forces were vast and powerful, but they also knew that they had something the Count Cecil could never understand, something that gave them an edge no weapon or technology could match. They had the unyielding human spirit, the unquenchable fire that burned within each and every one of them, and with that fire they would light the way to a new future, a future free from the council's tyranny and oppression. As the rebel fleet set course for the heart of the council's power, Cable stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the stars ahead. He knew that the battle to come would be the fight of his life, that the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, but he also knew that he was ready for it. With Azra by his side and a crew of brave, determined rebels at his back, he would face whatever challenges lay ahead with unwavering courage and unbreakable resolve. For he was Cable Barnes, the man who had survived the horrors of Vexus Prime and returned to lead a revolution. And he would not rest until the council's reign of terror was ended once and for all. The council's chamber was in an uproar, voices raised in anger and disbelief, fingers pointed accusingly at the holographic display that dominated the center of the room. On the screen, a single figure stood tall and proud, his battle-scarred armor gleaming in the harsh light of an alien sun. "Impossible," one of the counselors sputtered, his face pale with shock. "We sent him to his death. No one survives Vex's Prime." But there was no denying the evidence before their eyes. Cable Barnes, the human warrior they had exiled to the most hostile world in the known universe, was alive and well, and he wasn't alone. At his side stood a creature out of nightmare, a hulking beast with razor-sharp claws and fangs that dripped with venom. Its eyes gleamed with a feral intelligence, and its muscles rippled beneath a hide of mottled blue fur. "What is that thing?" another counselor demanded, her voice trembling with fear. "A CRNX," a third counselor replied, his tone grim. "The apex predator of Vexus Prime. They're said to be able to devour a dozen men in a single sitting." A hush fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. The council had sent Cable Barnes to his death, hoping to be rid of a thorn in their side once and for all. Instead, he had not only survived, but tamed the most fearsome creature on the planet, and now he was coming for them. The first sign of trouble came from the outer colonies, whispers of unrest and rebellion among the downtrodden masses the council had long relied on. The threat of exile to keep their subjects in line, holding up Vexus Prime as a fate worse than death. But with Cable Barnes' return, that threat had lost its teeth. If a mere human could survive the horrors of the alien world, what did the people have to fear? The whispers soon turned to shouts, and the shouts to open defiance. The council's Enforcers were overwhelmed, unable to stem the tide of anger and resentment that had been building for generations. And at the head of the rebellion, leading the charge with a fierce and fearless resolve, was Cable Barnes. He struck without warning, his Crack's companion by his side, a living weapon of unimaginable power. The council's defenses crumbled before him, their soldiers fleeing in terror at the sight of the snarling, snapping beast. In a matter of days, the council's iron grip on the galaxy had been shattered, their authority reduced to ashes and dust. And as Cable Barnes stood before the cowering councilors, his eyes blazing with righteous fury, they knew that their reign of tyranny was at an end. "You thought you could break me," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Thought you could cast me aside like so much garbage, but you underestimated the strength of the human spirit. You underestimated what a man can do when he's fighting for something bigger than himself." He reached out a hand, and the CNX nuzzled against his palm, a low rumble of contentment emanating from its chest. "On Vexus Prime, I found more than just a means to survive. I found a reason to live. I found a bond that goes beyond mere friendship or loyalty. And I found the power to stand up to the light of you." The councilors trembled before him, their eyes wide with fear and desperation. "Mercy," one of them whimpered, falling to his knees. "Please have mercy." Cable's lip curled in disgust. "Mercy like the mercy you showed to all those you exiled to Vex's Prime, like the mercy you showed to the countless lives you ruined in your quest for power." He shook his head, his gaze hard and unyielding. "No, you don't deserve mercy. What you deserve is justice, and that's exactly what you're going to get." With a nod to his companion Canon, Cable Barnes turned and strode from the council chamber, leaving the once mighty rulers of the galaxy to the tender mercies of the people they had oppressed for so long. And as word of his victory spread throughout the stars, the people rejoiced, for they knew that a new era had dawned, an era of freedom and hope and endless possibility, an era that would forever be known as the Age of Cable Barnes, the man who had defied the odds and brought a corrupt empire to its knees, the man who had proven once and for all the power of the human spirit.